Hello, I'm Mark Bradley, professor of history at the University of Chicago, where I also serve as the faculty director of the Posen Family Center for Human Rights and a deputy dean in the Division of the Social Sciences. And I'll be serving as your host for this event. I work on the international history of modern and post-colonial Southeast Asia. And I've had the good fortune of a number of engagements with the Beijing Center over time. First, teaching in the college's East Asian Civ sequence in Beijing. Later, the opportunity to engage with Chinese historians and other colleagues on modern Southeast Asian history and literature. And right now, working on a collaborative conference to be held with Beijing-based scholars at the Center on the history of the Global South. So like our guest tonight, I have a strong sense of the generative kind of collaborative relationships that the University of Chicago Center in Beijing can foster. I want to say just a few housekeeping things before we begin tonight. If you would like to listen to today's program in Chinese, you can click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and simply select Chinese. And I also want to encourage you to use the Q&A function as we go tonight to submit questions in either Chinese or English. I am delighted to play a role in convening this conversation between two distinguished anthropologists, Judith Farquhar and Lili Lai, about their remarkable collaborative research on Chinese medicine and the book that has emerged from it, Gathering Medicines, Nation and Knowledge in China's Mountain South. You see it right there. I want to start with some introductions. Judith Farquhar is the Max Pilevsky Professor Emerita of Anthropology at the University of Chicago. She is the author of 5 books, 2 of them co-authored, 2 edited collections, 4 special issues of leading journals, and dozens of journal articles, all of which reflects the fact that collaboration is hardwired into the ways in which Judy works. Her research has focused on traditional medicine, popular culture, and everyday life in contemporary China. And importantly, Judy served as the faculty director of the Beijing Center from 2016 to 2019. Lili Lai is associate professor of medical anthropology in the School of Health Humanities at Peking University. She is a social anthropologist of China with an additional expertise in the anthropology of knowledge and the anthropology of the body. Lili has done extensive ethnographic and interdisciplinary research in North and Southwest China in both rural and urban areas on health-related issues. So I want to set the scene a bit for our conversation today. Every collaboration has an origin story, and Judy and Lili have been working together in a variety of forms and on a variety of projects for almost 20 years now. They first met in 1999 when Judy gave a set of lectures at Beijing University of Chinese Medicine. Judy at the time was teaching at the University of North Carolina, and one of her students studying in Beijing later joined up with Lili to form a reading group around anthropological literature. A few years later, Lili came to North Carolina to undertake her doctoral study in anthropology with Judy. And when she completed her PhD, she came right back to China to take a position at Peking University. Fast forward a bit, and Judy and Lili are working on a project about traditional medicine, one nurtured in part by their connection to Chicago's Beijing Center. I want to frame the project just a little bit for you at the outset. Modern China is unique in developing and supporting the wide use of traditional medicine alongside Western medicine. In the early 2000s, the Chinese state encouraged all of the nation's registered minorities to, quote, salvage, sort, synthesize, and elevate folk medical knowledges in an effort to create local healthcare systems comparable to the nationally supported institutions of Chinese traditional medicine. Judy and Lili's book, Gathering Medicines, bears witness to this remarkable moment of knowledge development, while introducing the myriad therapeutic traditions of Southern China. Over a period of 6 years, they worked with 7 minority nationality groups in China's southern mountains, observing how medicines were gathered and local healing systems codified. Gathering Medicines shares their very intimate view of how people understand ethnicity, locality, the body, and nature. It is an ethnography of knowledge diversities in a multi-ethnic China, one that theorizes from the ground up the dynamic encounters between formal status knowledge and the popular authority of what Judy and Lili term the wild. Gathering Medicines will be published by the University of Chicago Press in March. Let me say just a bit about our format. We're in for a real treat. Judy and Lili are going to begin with a conversation about the ways in which their collaborative partnership produced the questions, the methods, and the arguments that make up Gathering Medicines. We'll come back toward the end of the hour to take questions from you. And again, I want to encourage you to put questions in the chat in either Chinese or English as we go along. So let me turn things over to you now and turn things over to Judy and Lili now.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I'm glad that this picture of us on the trail in southwestern China managed to turn up. I thank you for your kind introduction of our project. It makes it much easier for us to just talk about some of the fine points. So here's one fine point. Lili, in our research on the development of minority medicines in South China, what did we learn? Can you highlight one major point that our book makes that you consider to be especially important?
Okay. Thank you, Mark. And it's an honor to be here. And it's a great experience working with Judy. So we had, as Mark has said, we learned so much. I learned so much in our collaborative research. And here I'd like to highlight one thing in particular, that's health schools run by the government throughout China in 1960s and 1970s. It's called here in Chinese, Wei Xiao. The Wei Xiao training courses taught young villagers how to find locally available herbs, memorize their medicinal functions, process the plants they had gathered, and combine different herbs to compose formulas for common diseases. The trainees also studied some basic techniques of bone setting. So if we see here the picture, in this image, we're examining the Wei Xiao class notes of a village doctor in his 60s. They were written in a combination of Chinese and Li Su language. We found these Wei Xiao training schools were decisively influential in the formation of the minority medicines that are being institutionalized today. This history only became really clear to us in the course of a fieldwork in the Nujiang area, which runs along the Burmese border with Yunnan province. The oral histories we did with health workers in Nujiang in 2014 showed us how important these herbal medicine training classes from the collectivist era had been. So if we can see the old herbalists instructing barefoot doctors, that poster. So this kind of health school training equipped the students with everything they needed to practice primary healthcare using local resources. The Wei Xiao movement in particular emphasized the 3 locals policy. In Chinese is called San Tu, local formulas, local medicines, and local herbs. That's Tu Yi, Tu Fang, Tu Yi, Tu Yao. And also 4 Zi, 4 self-labors policy, which includes self-gathering, self-planting, self-processing, and self-applying medicinal herbs. 4 Zi 是自采、自种、自制、自用. So 3 to 4 Zi is very important. Through these Weixiao schools, these policies stimulated people's enthusiasm for studying, gathering, recognizing, planting, and developing indigenous medicine. And moreover, the health workers themselves, mostly village doctors, working in rural areas, they were gathered into the socialist state through this movement. And in return, they spent decades serving the people, 为人民服务, gathering experience and refining their skills. So by the time we interviewed these local doctors, their embodied histories showed us how global, national, and regional medical worlds could be made into locally useful primary care.
Right, Lili. Thanks so much for that overview of the health schools. Very, very important. I think we can call it a discovery of our study, is the importance of the 60s and 70s health schools. But you mentioned in the curriculum of the health schools bone setting as part of the training. So this reference to bone setting reminds me of what we learned about the hands-on therapeutics that we saw especially frequently in the south and southwest of China. One of the big questions we shared when we began this research was, how do minority nationality medicines differ from the traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, that's practiced in clinics and hospitals all over China? Well, as you know, Lili, it's very hard to generalize about so many different local developments undertaken by folk practitioners. Every doctor has their own knowledge base and therapeutic style. But I've begun to feel that there's at least one general difference between the TCM I studied for so long and that we find in urban China and the forms of medicine we witnessed across the South. In these subtropical forested mountains, many ailments are treated with surface manipulations. In the book, we called these haptic techniques, following the lead of some medical historians and anthropologists working in South Asia. Haptic techniques include cupping, moxibustion, many styles of acupuncture and needling, massage, skin scraping, and the use of herbal plasters against the skin or over a lesion. Of course, there's also a rich tradition in the South of herbalist practice. Herbal doctors make medicines that are swallowed or taken by mouth. In our chapter on plants, we talk about this kind of medicine a great deal. But we also kept on encountering doctors, often known as bone setters, who used many powerful techniques on the surface of the body to alleviate deep-seated or chronic disorders. These haptic techniques tend to be clinically marginalized in the big cities and mostly northern areas where I've studied TCM. But observing them led Lili and me to recall the anthropological idea of local bodies. We began to ask Southern doctors we talked with, are Southern mountain bodies different from Northern bodies or foreigners' bodies? Are the bodies you treat specific to your region? The answers we got, both in verbal explanations and in practical gestures and offhand remarks, are discussed in the bodies chapter of our book. It's too much to go into now, but I will say that learning from China's Southern mountain bone setters gave me a novel experience of being embodied myself, a new sense of the relationships between my own body's surfaces and its hidden depths. As acupuncture patients have frequently said to me, these haptic techniques give us a new relationship to our own way of being physically embodied. So, Lili, these thoughts come from a kind of field anthropology that we both value a lot. So may I ask you, how did this particular project over the last 6 or 7 years, how did this project influence the direction of your research career in anthropology?
This project has made a significant impact on my research orientation in anthropology. It has deepened my perception of anthropology in general and my way of being an anthropologist in particular. My dissertation research was a somewhat conventional village study that sought to sensitively read everyday social life and analyze certain frictions in the village in North China. In this research, I paid much attention to social and interpersonal issues. I critiqued China's rural-urban divide, noted the dilemmas of grassroots officials opposed by their fellow villagers. And I documented rural environmental problems arising from changing lifestyles. In other words, my main concern was society-related issues. In the end, the study did not differ much from other mainstream sociological studies done in China. This collaborative project with Judy has turned my research interest toward the anthropology of knowledge, or what Judy and I have long referred to as knowing practice. In this slide, you see us collecting good luck from the god of literature in Beijing Taoist temple, that's Wenchang. This is a different approach from my dissertation. It does not adopt a conventional sociological approach, which would investigate how minority medicine is organized exclusively human social relationships. Instead, by narrowing the focus to knowledge and widening it to practice, I think our project cuts across anthropology's classical nature-culture divide, and it defeats a standard social science dualism that contrasts knowledge and practice. Thus, we consider herbal medicines and institution building together, and we examine the scholarly and clinical work of gathering medicines together with the embodied experiences of doctors and patients. Aiming to relativize knowledge and often working beyond the reach of China's official medical institutions, we had to consider how to do anthropology of emergent, scattered, and diverse medical knowledges. So in this, our long-term field research, I learned to appreciate particular styles of knowing, or more specifically, to ask, how do minority nationality medical people know what they know and apply in their therapeutic work? I think I have turned from social anthropology approaches to anthropology of knowing practice. This is a change in my approach that has renewed and deepened my appreciation of anthropology. I now think of our global field as one that takes life instead of culture or society as its central concern.
Well, thank you so much, Lili, for talking about some of the theoretical insights we achieved through working on minority nationality medicines. These are things we've talked about together for years. And in fact, Lili has strongly influenced my thinking in the process. Perhaps even more important, we've both learned social theory from Chinese medicine and from minority medicine activists. But this project has also influenced my thinking as an anthropologist in a more methodological mode. For one thing, I found Lili's style of doing fieldwork quite inspiring. She conducts wonderful interviews, surprising all of us, herself and me and the people being interviewed, with the observations and memories that come out with her persistent questioning. When she interviews, she shows people how much she enjoys hearing from their lives, and almost always they really want to explain all sorts of things to her. We also both learned a lot from some of the official survey researchers who hosted us in some parts of the Southwest. I'm thinking of one public health researcher in Yunnan province whom we particularly enjoyed working with. In his dealings with minority medicine practitioners, this institute director expressed a profound respect for their expertise. But at the same time, he lectured them about how they ought to be doing development better. He did not try to be an objective observer from the outside of their medical and cultural work. He positioned himself as a partner in their development movement. He wanted these Southwestern nationality activists to achieve positive recognition for their local knowledge, and he wasn't afraid to take sides in that struggle. We also enjoyed working with some very scientific and scholarly public health researchers in Hunan. These curious and open-minded officials, representatives of the World Health Organization in their region, taught us a lot too. They kindly escorted us through villages and towns, fields and forests, to meet village doctors, shamans, bone setters, and healing grandmothers. At the same time, they shared their historical and scientific work of developing a Tujia nationality medical system that could be taught and licensed. In learning from these seasoned field researchers working for Chinese research units, I personally gave up some old anthropological myths. I'm no longer interested in solitary anthropological fieldwork. I don't want to be the stereotypical free and independent ethnographer who authoritatively understands the culture of an exotic place. I've come to believe that field research should always be collaborative all the way down. And the anthropological findings, the new knowledge that comes out of collaborative research, is different. It's more valuable than classic ethnography in many ways. I think you can see that value everywhere in our book. But speaking of collaboration, Lili, do you feel that our base at the Beijing Center was important to the success of this project? And could you give an example or two?
Yes, the Beijing Center has been a firm support as our research throughout this project. I still remember the day you and we both moved in. We were among the very first academics to set up our work in the faculty suite of the Beijing Center, even before its official inauguration. In 2011, we held our first training workshop in the center with our local research associates from southern China. For a series of trainings like this, we also invited Chinese anthropologists to teach ethnographic methods. Our 3 anthropology training workshops not only functioned as a way to orient our collaborators, they also helped us to build an active network of research partners, and it drew in Beijing colleagues. Our friends in this growing Chinese anthropology and sociology research network has helped us think through all our projects over the last 10 years. It's been significant.
I agree. The Beijing Center has been a very important rallying point for scholars and intellectuals in Beijing and beyond. The importance of the center and the reputation of the University of Chicago in Chinese universities and research centers really grew during the center's first decade. Many students, faculty, researchers, writers, and artists have told me how much they appreciate having this central and neutral place to engage in challenging scholarly exchange. For Lili and me and our collaboration, the center was a huge help. During the weeks and months when I was in Beijing over these 10 years, we were able to occupy adjacent spaces in the faculty suite while we were writing, and we could debate the fine points and writing strategies over takeout lunches in the coffee shop. We collected a large library of minority nationality medicine printed materials at the center. This archive has now moved to Lili's office at the School of Health Humanities at Peking University. Several summers, we employed University of Chicago undergraduate interns as research assistants. Among my fondest memories of our collaborations in the center are the whiteboard sessions we had in the small classrooms, where we enlisted the help of interns and an occasional local academic friend to help us plan the book and think through our arguments and evidence. Of course, we also benefited a lot from visits to the center of Chicago faculty like Mark Bradley, pictured here, and other North American scholars who were willing to listen to us talk about our project. Mark?
Yeah.
Did you want to jump in?
I do want to jump in. That was fascinating. It's fun to see that last picture, Judy. You know, when you're entertaining people with beggar's chicken, which I believe is one of the best dishes I've ever eaten in my life, I'll listen to, anybody's research project for as long as I can talk. But in fact, even if the food had not been good, it would have been fascinating to hear the kind of work that you've done. I've got a couple things that I want to ask about, and then the questions are starting to already come in with the chat. But I wonder if, just to kind of orient people on this call about ethnic minorities, because they're so central to the work that you're doing in this book, And to help us understand a little bit about what ethnicity means in the Chinese context, there are, for instance, these 55 national minorities. People talk about those in the Chinese context as if that's a kind of thing that people know. Some people who are listening today may not know that. But more importantly, for the actors that you were most closely working with, how much is their ethnicity or their nationalities a focus for the ways in which they're understanding the practices in which they're engaged in?
Well, I could start off by saying that when Lili and I began this project, we were invited by the State Administration of Traditional Chinese Medicine to study emerging traditional medicines. But these were all emerging under the banners of nationality identity or nationality activism. So we recognized immediately that we had to try to understand what nationality or ethnicity is in China today. And especially as anthropologists, we wanted to know what ethnicity or nationality is for the particular people we needed to talk to. So we did ask lots and lots of people about their ethnic belonging, their ethnic identifications, and we got a wide range of answers. It was very difficult to generalize about what ethnicity was for any one group, much less all of the groups in the south and southwest of China. So, but we continued to think about ethnicity, and we were helped by a scholar in Beijing who Lili knows even better than I do, and who gave us a few tips early on. You want to remind us about that, Lili?
Sure. Yes, this is kind of tricky question, but it's also not that difficult for us to work with. As Judy said, we started with working with State Administration of Traditional Chinese Medicine. That means we just follow the officially recognized nationality groups. And we are very much inspired also by Thomas Mullaney's book, Coming to Terms with Nationality. And then my friends in China Academy of Chinese Medicine, they have been working on minority medicine for years. So that's also a very important resource. One thing maybe we can try to remind people is since it's been recognized, since those groups are recognized since 1950s, it's been about 50 years, and people have been developing along this line. Of course, as Judy mentioned, it's very complicated. There are different groups. For example, the Achang group we worked, they decide, the specific village, the people, they decide to go with Achang, the name of Achang, as late as 1980s. And before, they always recognize themselves as Bai instead of Achang. But then they decide, okay, we can go with Achang. So that depends on local conflicts between Achang group and Bai group. It's kind of a fluid term for them. Another very important example is Mr. Zhu Guoben, who was previous associate director of State Administration of Traditional Chinese Medicine. He's the one who's a big promoter of developing minority nationality medicines. I attended his a conference about Qiang medicine in Sichuan in 2012, and he gave an opening speech, and which is very remarkable to everyone, because he was talking about history. And in that specific area, and it started with different groups of people. They have not only Qiang, they have Tibetan people, even some Yi people. And but the more important is people live in that area. The locality was even more important than nationality. And actually, that's our Judy and I, our other very important discovery is people locally, they work more with local, the concept of local, and maybe we can see along with nationality. So that's something we really want to remind people.
And I could also add that maybe working on doing anthropological research on medicine, folk medicine or traditional medicine, is a particularly good opportunity to unpack and reconsider the notion of ethnicity. Because what these local doctors, even the doctors who were most enthusiastically self-identified as Tujia or Achang or Lisu, or, well, not Lisu actually, but or Zhuang, the most enthusiastic ethnic activists were also medical people. And they were emphasizing that their kind of medicine had everything to do with local herbs and locally transmitted techniques. So that they were filling the concept of ethnicity with all kinds of folk science and local knowledge, which makes it hard to think about the kind of nationality politics that is signaled by Tom Mulaney's book, Coming to Terms with the Nation.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question at all, but it's a complicated issue for us.
Yeah, no, I think it does, Judy. And I mean, so one intervention is trying to kind of unpack or think about what's behind these categories that get created, with the local being really significant for you. The other thing, and it's emerging in some of the questions on the chat, is, Lili talking about moving beyond some of the frameworks that she and you had thought in a previous time. And people struck by Lili saying that, it's life, not culture or society, that became the ways in which she wanted to think about the project. And again, people asking for an example. So I want to just ask for a specific example that really struck me in what you were saying. The question that you were posing about whether Southern mountain bodies are different. And, you've got a chapter that's talking about bodies. That's one of the places where you go, but could either or both of you just unpack a little bit where those answers went and then what you made of them in this, again, sort of larger conceptual frame for thinking about the project?
So the question is, what does it look like to think through a particular case when you're focusing on life rather than society or culture?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think Lili has lots of insights about this, but I might just say that I do think that the bodies chapter is one place to look for that kind of a thing, where I hate to make big generalizations, but most traditional medical worlds or systems in China, they understand every human body to be very responsive to its environment. So Southern bodies are particularly responsive to damp heat, and they, which is of course typical of this subtropical climate. And therefore, a Southern medicine has got to be able to deal with bodies that have a particular relationship to a particular climate. Now, that doesn't mean that. So if I ask someone, well, I'm from Chicago, is your medicine capable of affecting my body? And they'll say, well, if you're here and under our conditions, then your body is not a foreign body. It's quickly becoming a local body. All right, and therefore our medicine should be able to work fine for it.
Yeah.
Right. Lili, what do you think?
Yeah, this question actually it's a very great question. Is there a local body, right? You're asking if I emphasize the research focus now is on life, then it seems contradictory about is there a local body, seemingly. For example, I was thinking the patient who is Han Chinese, but she had a very serious cancer disease, was treated in Dayaoshan in Guangxi, the Yao Minority Medicine Hospital. She traveled a long way to find this Yao doctor to treat her. But as Judy said, she went there, and so it's kind of a intertwined question. If we focus on life, then we kind of go beyond the ideology of, oh, this is only biomedical diagnosis of cancer. And she came to Dayaoshan, and then the doctor treated her as some big, because she had an infection on her skin. And so that's some very serious skin disease, but the categorization is according to Yao medicine. So at that moment, her body under the Yao doctors, if we use Foucault's medical gaze, she became local Yao body, and then he's treating this local body. But if we focus on life, this life transcends all this division. Because I was looking at someone was asking about question about is rural medicine or some minority medicine, is that outmoded, outdated, and past? No. When we concern about life question, people, they always be actively pursuing different kind of strategy to work on the body. So it's a fluid category if we think about body, but meanwhile it can be localized under specific if I use this cliche medical gaze, or specific medical knowledge, if put it more general.
Yeah, the question in the chat also goes to kind of generational perspectives on this. So as you were encountering younger people in localities, were they apprehending, understanding, thinking about this in the same ways, or are there generational differences? And I think one of the things the chat question is getting at is 20 years on, as that younger generation, are sort of, they're the people who are on the stage, does this have the same kind of valence that it does now?
It's a very important question, because I say that because it's so important to the experts we spoke with in the field again and again. But this is partly our fault. I mean, one of our major research questions, which we brought up in every interview, was that of discipleship. We asked senior doctors whether they had students, whether they were mentoring anyone to step into their shoes as a clinician, as a healer. And many of these fabled, renowned experts we spoke with were not cultivating younger people to take up the expertise which they had gained through so much hard work, going up into the mountains to gather herbs. But this is one of the things that's at stake in the minority medicine movements that we visited across the South. That these activists are trying to put together a medical system that can be summarized and organized into textbooks. The textbooks can be mobilized in medical schools, and young doctors can be trained and licensed to practice Yao medicine, Achang medicine, Zhuang medicine, Qiang medicine. And so there's even some very conservative old doctors who really don't think that anyone younger could ever get it right. Even people like that recognize the need to pass on the knowledge to a younger generation. So there's among the Zhuang groups in southern Guangxi, they were having considerable success in producing a whole new generation, 2 new generations of Zhuang medicine practitioners. In other places, like in Lisu areas out near the Burma border, not so much, because people were having a hard time organizing, and even some of the senior doctors who had thriving practices in their villages had not found anyone to take on their expertise. through education. Now, I just have to say one more thing. As a scholar, as an anthropologist of traditional Chinese medicine, the answer about generations in general for traditional medicines in China is that people who are chronically ill with things that cannot be well treated by Western medicine or biomedicine seek out traditional medicines in China. It's an option they have, and we find again and again that people with difficult and confusing disorders, which cannot be well treated by biomedicine, they've tried, they've failed, they turn to traditional medicines with great hope. And they work intensively sometimes with doctors of traditional medicine to find the right formulas, to find the right everyday life habits that will gradually improve their situation. So I personally don't think traditional medicines are going away. They will always be needed.
Yeah. Lili, could I kind of pose the question the other way? I'm a historian, so I don't tend to look forward. I tend to look backward. And you were talking about the collectivist period, thinking about the 60s, thinking about the 70s. Clearly campaigns going on in that period from the visual iconography that you had up around Southern traditional medicine. How did that moment and the moment that you were looking at, the kind of state-initiated projects of the 2000s and forward, operate differently at the locality?
Thank you, Mark. I think this question kind of also related with that rural medicine question. When Judy was talking, I was thinking about, yes, actually, if we look at the difference, one thing could be the rural-urban difference, because at the 1960s and 70s, very important is about putting the medicine down, like going down to the countryside, and then very much emphasize on the resource. That's why that centus, the three locals and 4 self-labors are very important. And but for this time, the movement we are following, it's mainly conducted by researchers from big research units and the urbanites. And then very successful example, like Judy mentioned, Zhuang Medical Research Center, that's in Nanning, in the capital city of Guangxi. Also, the very good doctors, we are very impressed. And they are kind of drawn from their local rural workshop to the cities to work in the hospitals. So this could be something kind of to be concerned with. That's a big difference. And it's more kind of to go to the local, to gather the medicine and put them, to let them develop in the cities. At least it appears to be. But meanwhile, maybe another lines I was thinking, the market, and today the market has played a big role in the developing minority nationality medicine too, and there is always young people, the rural kids of the doctors, and taking it as one way to make living. And because that does provide kind of sufficient income if the treatment is effective enough and gain local reputation. But this from rural to urban is a big social trend. It's kind of hard to predict, to think about, but our observation, this new movement, the big difference from the previous one, I think could be this. It's kind of urban centered in a sense.
Yeah.
Yes, but one more thought. Once Lili and I get talking, we can't close any topic. It can't be finished. But we also found that hidden in a lot of the accounts that these activists gave us of what they were trying to do, even hidden in their very formal textbooks, that they were publishing is a profound respect for the authority of the rural, the authority of the old healer who goes up into the mountains to gather medicines. That's why our book is called Gathering Medicines, right? Because we didn't meet a single practitioner who did not want to insist to us that he often goes up into the mountains to gather medicines, right? And this rambling herbalist image inhabits the traditional and folk medicines of China in a way that really can't be minimized. Right, Lili?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, well, this nicely goes to a question that's just popped up in the chat that's thinking a little bit about who are these activists and how do you think about notions of trust between activists and local practitioners or healers?
We have a few cases, don't we? We have a few cases where, with his, for example, in Nujiang, our doorway into that rather recalcitrant area where people are not famous for being helpful to outsiders. Our doorway was an ethnobotanist who was very much an amateur, but he was an experienced amateur, and he had published a plants guide, a medicinal plants guide to the region. And he accompanied us for a few days as we traveled up this long, narrow prefecture. And we had one occasion where we went to see Dr. La with him, right? And the ethnobotanist had been participating in government-sponsored conferences for sharing knowledge about herbals, right? And so the ethnobotanist introduces us to Dr. La, and he says to Dr. La, he says, "Gee whiz, you didn't attend our last workshop about local medicines. Are you going to come to the next one? Don't you think you should? We'd really love to have you there." And Dr. La says, "Oh yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'll see." You know, he clearly did not want to share his knowledge with the official ethnobotanist. Yeah. So, and we saw versions of different, but analogous versions of this in a lot of places.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in very early had to do with, you know, the discussion of sort of haptic techniques, a focus on the body, and then a kind of connection. The question is really about how do those get connected to questions about the mind? And in terms of thinking about mental health and whether that kind of duality makes sense in the ways that people were seeing these sorts of practices, but where's the mind and the body together?
All yours, Lili.
Yeah.
Well, Judy is the expert because I took the very first body seminar with her. Yes, this mind body, it doesn't work for minority medicine. That's a simple answer. It's been in medical anthropology, we have been critiquing this mind body dualism for years. So even for Chinese medicine, and we don't really do treating separate mental illness. It's always work with the body. So that's a simple answer. And so haptic, of course. And we have an example. One local doctor's father, who's also very important drum medicine doctor, he developed his work to treat people with mental illness using that haptic actually is even more interesting because it's clearly haptic, but he's using his hand to feel the qi from the head. He's not touching the head, but it's haptic. Maybe that's a side point for that question.
Yeah, but is there a sense, you know, Beijing traditional medical practices, Southern Mountain traditional medical practices, that the mind-body question is different, or that's a continuity across that doesn't change by locality?
I think there might be some subtle differences, but they would not be organized according to ethnic groups, right? So that you can't say that the Zhuang body-mind relationship, such as it is different in X, Y, and Z way from the TCM mind-body relationship. You'd have to talk to individuals and analyze their very carefully considered positions on things. For example, we in Zhuang medicine, we know lots of people doing Zhuang medicine, and we interviewed a lot of people, and it's a wonderful area to work. But we ended up really falling for one guy who's relatively young, very, very smart, and a very good theorist, and a very good clinician. And he would have unique and interesting things to say about why the Zhuang mind is not the same as the TCM mind-body unity, right? But what would that tell us socially? What would that tell us as anthropologists? It would give us something, an expert to admire. But it wouldn't answer the question in general for different kinds of Chinese traditional medicines.
Yeah. So there's a lot of curiosity in the chat about what's next. The book's out. Does the project go on? Is there a different sort of collaborative relationship that emerges out of this? Does it take you to another place? Where do both of you go next?
Lili has a plan for the Chinese edition, which is fascinating, but maybe she doesn't want to spill the beans yet.
Not sure. I've been telling friends. I have another collaborative research with Eric Kachmer, who also worked with Judy, about Chinese medicine and COVID. And it's a very interesting project, and I think very important too, because Chinese medicine has played a very significant role, but hasn't been very much recognized by people outside the world of Chinese medicine. So that's something we are working on, and how to do it. Like Judy just said, very important question about how does that tell us socially or anthropologically. And I myself kind of had this dilemma of thinking into the world of Chinese medicine, like which make me not thinking clearly about how can I tell anthropologically and socially. So that's a very good reminder to me.
Yeah.
Well, so that's a new project for you and Eric. But you also were telling me the other day about a plan for a version of gathering medicines. That you would write substantial new chapters for, and bring out in Chinese. And you would kindly allow me to be a co-author on that.
Of course you are. Right. That's a real continuation of this project. I write the Chinese version of our collaborative project, and bring something more to the audience here, and Chinese anthropologists here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should say that Lili is a major leader in medical anthropology in China, and medical anthropology is the most popular and the most rapidly growing kind of anthropology in China. So whatever she puts together and gets out in Chinese is going to be read for sure.
Oh,
I can well imagine. The hour's up and it's just like flown by. This has been a really, really interesting set of presentations, but a particularly interesting set of answers to the questions that have emerged out of them. Thank you, Judy and Lili, for taking the time to sit down and walk us through the project. I want to remind people that this book is out from University of Chicago Press in March, and so if you want to read more, it's there. I also would like to invite attendees to join us for the upcoming Beijing anniversary event, The Next Frontier in Chinese Energy and Environmental Policy. That will be held Thursday evening, January 21st, that's Chicago time, Wednesday morning, January 22nd in China. Again, my thanks to all of you for joining us, and particularly to Judy and Lili for a wonderful discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.